Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, I, Aaron Gerke, and Kevin Bender are engaging in a conversation about being neighbors. Yes, the word neighbor can be used to refer to any person in the world that we interact with, yet God has also given us neighbors, literal people who live next door to us. And God has plans to utilize us and our homes and our families to be people of peace in our neighborhoods and in our communities, to share the love of Christ and to demonstrate that to the people right around us. I pray that you are encouraged and challenged by this episode. We really hope you enjoy it.
Well, hi, Kevin.
Morning, Aaron.
It's good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you as well.
I don't think we've made any official announcement at all about why we are in this location.
Probably not.
We've been doing this for
We did like a mystery on the first one of guess where we are, but
I know.
Guess why we're here.
Yeah. Why we are here is this reason. We had a technical difficulty with a microphone receiver, and Aaron just hasn't sent it back yet to get it fixed or repaired.
You know how it goes.
Yeah.
Listeners.
Oh, man. So that's the reality of the situation.
And if you've just been listening in and just wondering where we've been for the last few weeks, we are in a secret special spot that...
Should we show them?
If they're listening, I don't know if we can.
Well, if you're listening, you don't get to see this.
Oh, okay, we're zooming out.
We're gonna zoom out. Look at that.
It's the sanctuary, listeners.
We're just crammed in between the organ and the
communion rail.
But look at that. When we just zoom in,
it's a cozy little spot.
Ta-da!
Little cafe.
There we are.
Yeah.
Welcome back. So I went a little too. I'm gonna go one click back. Ta-da.
Boom, perfect.
All right. Anyways, so yeah, here we are. This was the final week.
Yes.
In my sermon from Sunday, on this sermon series, "Follow Me, Go and Be."
And as you zoom in and out there,
Yeah.
right, in this space, kind of makes me think about, particularly about neighborhoods, right? This last week was "Follow Me, Go and Be neighbors."
Yeah.
And just in life in general, I think normally we kind of, we operate from the zoomed in perspective.
Okay.
Right? I'm mostly just concerned with like my household.
Yeah.
My job.
Like super zoomed in.
My life.
Yeah.
But you zoom out, there on the camera, it's like, oh wow, there's a bigger picture of where we are, and in this sanctuary, who's around, who's in these spaces. Barb would be your neighbor if she was here, the organist. But in our neighborhoods too, I think, at least for most of my life, I operated kind of from I didn't even conceive of my living space as really even being in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like if I used the word neighborhood, I was probably describing someone, like directions of how to get to me, like I'm in, this neighborhood.
Okay.
But it's not like I thought about like, oh yeah, like there's all these other humans right next to me that God has actually placed me into.
Yeah.
I would more think of it as like, oh yeah, like we picked this spot because it's got cheap rent and
Right.
like it's all me specific reasons why I'm in this structure.
I know.
Right.
I know. And it's interesting, but even with that kind of attitude that got you there, God still also got you there.
Right.
And because God is, this is basic Christianity, but because God is with you, just think about that, right? He is in you. He's all around you. That means He's with you in your home. And why is God with you? Is it just for you? He is with you to comfort you, console you, to remind you of who He is and who you are and that you're loved by Christ. But He also is with you so that you can be Him to other people that are around you, so on and so forth. So we have to get ourselves to the mindset that God plans on utilizing us in our homes. That's the whole, again, that's the general concept of this whole sermon series that we are doing, right? Just this. Jesus says, follow me. Okay, well, we follow him. And if we've got our eyes on him, then he says, here's your family. I mean, that was one of the weeks, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Love your family, disciple your family, raise your family to know Jesus. Here are your friends. Live as my person to your friends. Disciple your friends. Lead your friends into deeper faith. Here are your coworkers. Here are your fellow citizens. Like all this stuff. So it should make sense to us, those of you who have been tracking along, that our homes, our neighborhoods should operate in the exact same kind of realm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this on this podcast before. It feels like I have, but who knows? I struggle sometimes with being a good neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be.
I think back in the day, okay, this is my sense, and I should probably fact check this with someone who's much older than me.
Yeah.
But I feel like, in like the 40s, people were, like, neighborhoods were much more, like, connected, and people knew who their neighbors were, and they maybe spent more time with their neighbors, and had conversations with their neighbors. But yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, for the longest time in my life, again, it wasn't about who's next to me in my neighborhood. It was very individual. Like, my going into a neighborhood or living where I was living, it was like, I might have had neighbors in the same building as me, living in apartments or townhouses, and it's like, I had no idea who they were.
Yeah.
Never go knock to introduce myself.
Yeah.
Actually, when I went to Washington, Missouri for my vicarage, which is like a pastor internship for a year, I remember we moved in to the house they had for us there. We were in a neighborhood, and there was a woman across the street, came over with like a plate of cookies, was like, welcome to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
See, that kind of a thing I feel like it feels antiquated, feels like something from a time of old.
Yeah.
And that maybe our generations haven't been as good. Maybe we've become a little more individual or distant from our close neighbors.
Yeah.
Now that we have like technology to reach or stay connected with neighbors who are much, much, much further away.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I mean, I have no idea what the sociology study is behind it besides my own experience or just observation. But I mean, there's got to be something to that. And I mean, I think what we're hearing and learning, like from our generation and the one below us, is like a deep human need and desire for community, like real, like I want to know that I belong to a place, to a group of people, like there is this, that's a very human need. But again, like technology has given us access to the entire world.
Yeah.
To the entire world. But that's incredibly overwhelming, And I think that's what was behind in my sermon. I don't know if you remember, but I was talking about how like universally Jesus saves the entire world.
That's right, yeah. But then you did this little turn too.
Yeah, but Jesus also saved you, right? Like Jesus plans on enacting his kingdom here on earth, like all of earth, but he also wants to do it like in you. So like while there's this macro level to God's plan and to even to our call to love our neighbors as ourselves, yes, all of humanity, I would say that's part of it. Love your neighbor as yourself. That means everybody.
Sure.
But how can you practically say that you can do that, like with billions of people across the world? Like you just can't.
Yeah.
So where can you? In your neighborhood.
Yeah, and I kind of like that even as like almost a litmus test, because sometimes I think I'm like, oh, of course I love all people. Yeah. Like it's easy to kind of like agree with that notion.
Yes, exactly.
On a broad level.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you ask me the question of like, oh yeah, well, what have you done for your neighbors?
Yeah.
Like, Sally across the street. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. I should probably check in and see how Sally's doing. You know?
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it becomes much more real, I suppose, when we think about the actual people who we see day to day.
Yeah.
And of course, like I said, I mean, your neighbor, not only in your neighborhood, but like even at work, like you have coworkers, maybe they're at the desk next to you, like they're your neighbor.
You're right. But that was a different sermon series. We better focus just on our
Yeah,
neighborhood.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's what I was trying to do in this sermon was like, yes, all people, of course,
Right.
but also the people that you live next door to.
Yeah. So how do we do that then? I mean, we're all in neighborhoods. We know that. We're regardless of whether we're in like suburban or farmland with lots of space in between us.
Yeah.
Like we still have people living on either side of us.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of my sermon, I did share 5 keys to better neighboring. Maybe it would be worthwhile to, I don't know, to chat through those things and maybe
flesh them out.
Yeah, expound upon them
Sure.
more. So, I guess listener or viewer, maybe let's do that. So, the first one was listen to God.
Okay.
Listen to God. I mean, it's basically scripture and prayer.
Kind of like listen to God so that we almost get on his page in terms of like his heart towards our neighbors.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that we see them as he sees them. So that we love them as he loves them.
Yeah, I was just this morning actually in like devotional time reading Luke chapter 15.
Okay.
Right, and this is the chapter that's got the parable of the prodigal son. But before that, it's also got a couple other parables like the lost sheep, lost coin.
Yep.
And in it, Jesus he's talking about. Well, I mean, he's opening up for us a little picture of God's heart, you know, and what God is like. And he's like somebody who, you know, looks out at his sheepfold and, oh shoot, there's one missing.
Yeah.
And God's not real satisfied with just being like, well, maybe he'll turn up, you know, like.
I mean, I got 99%.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know. No, he's actually pretty concerned with people who aren't within his sheepfold.
Yeah.
You know, who are outside of it, who are, you know, who aren't close to, who aren't having a conversation with him, who aren't, you know, aren't listening to him, or maybe those people who don't know that God is speaking to them.
Yeah.
You know, he wants them to hear his voice.
Yeah.
He wants them to know what we know, that God loves us, cares for us, is with us, right?
Yeah.
Like this is very much on his heart.
Absolutely. So, and we learn God's heart by reading the scriptures, and then we take it and it translates into our lives, and we're shaped by that word when we pray about it, and when we ask God to change our heart to be like his and to change our eyes to be like his. So, you know, what I recommended in the sermon was go on a prayer walk around your neighborhood. And just that's literally just walking while praying, and that you can pray with your eyes open, just so you know, like, you know, don't
You don't have to fold your hands and close your eyes. It could be dangerous out there on the streets.
Yeah, exactly. So just talk to God, you know, and notice people. Notice, I don't know, if somebody's, you know, having a hard time getting in or out of their car or their house, like is there physical stuff that they might need help with around their home, and you can offer to be assistance to them. I don't know, notice and see if there's, you know, I don't know, arguing or something happening, like, you know, pray for those people that reconciliation might happen. Like there's all this, all these opportunities. I mean, I was riding my bike one day, and I was trying to get to the trails, and I was almost hit by a lady, and you know, in her car, and she was very, very mad at me, like just yelling and profane and all this stuff. And I mean, it was her fault, but so part of my heart was like, man, I just wanted to like
Give her the business.
yeah, like you almost killed me, but I didn't, and you know, and my heart, I thank God for that, but it more broke as I was driving away. Like, man, I wonder, like, she must be having a really hard day, you know, like having a hard time, like just to be that, like that responsive and that angry. So, yeah, to just have our heart like break, you know, like God's heart breaks for what is lost, you know. So, yeah, so listen to God. The second is really interesting, to identify people of peace.
Okay. Now, what's a person of peace?
So a person of peace is somebody who is attuned. I mean, I would say it's somebody that God is using for the betterment of that community or that neighborhood. Somebody who's, I think, humble of heart and giving and has the best interests of that community in mind. And they may or may not be Christian people.
Okay.
So likely that person of peace is also kind of a respected member of the community, that people know that person and they know people and have a good rapport as somebody who cares, for the community. So this is actually something that on the mission field, like as Christians try to take the gospel to new places, and I've heard this in Muslim nations right now, like in Africa, where the gospel is penetrating what those Christian missionaries do, and they're oftentimes local like African people, converts, from Islam that are now Christians. What they do is they actually look for, and this is what they call it, a person of peace in that neighborhood. Somebody that would open up their home, who might be receptive to the good work and this positive message of peace that comes through Jesus. And they may or may not be Christian people. So we would want to do the same thing, like in our neighborhoods. Like, is there a neighbor who kind of everybody sort of knows? Like on my street, there's a guy named George, and George, he walks his dog, and when we first moved in the neighborhood, like you'd always see him just like hanging out on the street on his way up, and if somebody was out, George always stopped and talked to the people, and he does to us too. I don't know George all that well. He lives like a block and a half away, so I've got a couple more immediate neighbors, but I might even know George better than I do those immediate neighbors just because he's so friendly.
Sure.
So much so that we had some family friends who were elderly, and they were actually driving through our region, and they wanted to stop and see my wife and I, and they were having trouble like getting to our house, and they were, no offense, but they were using a map and like a compass, I think. I don't know. I'm just
protractor.
Yeah, and like I don't think they had a cell phone, so they couldn't just call us and like talk us through.
Yeah.
And we're like, where are they? They were supposed to be here at a certain time. They showed up quite a while later, and they got to our house. And then when they got there, they said, yeah, we were just driving around and we were lost, and this very friendly man offered us directions, but instead of just telling us where to go, he just got in our van and showed us where to go, and we explained, like, we're looking for a pastor, and he's like, I think I know who you're talking about, and he got him to our house. So
that's awesome.
This is George, So
Yeah.
anyways, so people of peace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And I think this is something that even Jesus, right, when he was sending out the 72, right, early on in his ministry, he sends them out to go kind of proclaim the gospel, the good news. And I believe that same concept of people of peace, he says, stay with them.
Oh, yeah.
Right, on your way, like people will open their doors to you, perhaps, if they do. Go in, stay with them.
Yep.
Let them put you up, let them house you, because that's going to bolster kind of your ministry.
Yeah.
And if they aren't that way, if they're not people of peace, they're like, shake the dust.
Shake the dust off. Yeah, I know.
So people of peace, and I'm assuming this is going to help too, as I think of larger neighborhood impact, right? It's one thing for one person to try and do everything in your neighborhood, right? Like I don't think what we're saying or suggesting is, you need to take on for yourself every single person in that entire neighborhood, and you need to get to know all of them right away, right? But like a person of peace, they maybe also have this kind of, heart for their neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's like now it's almost a partnership.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
A way. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, listen to God, people of peace, or identify people of peace. Third one, it's pretty simple, is share meals. This is something my wife and I have talked about, and it's just one of these deals that we just have to make happen, but like, we keep saying, like, we should just, make some food, hang out in the front yard, in the driveway. We would invite people over beforehand and just that's it. Like, just eat food and chat, get
Yeah.
to know each other.
Neighborhood cookout,
Yeah.
barbecue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people do this, in some places. Actually, after the service, a woman from our church, she told me that we were having coffee, and she was sitting with one of her neighbors, and they live in a rural, kind of rural part of our community, but their whole road just did this, but it was. Well, I'll just name drop him. Levi, if you're listening to this, Levi Matson from Evangel Community Church.
Oh, yeah.
He actually headed it up. So it's they're all neighbors together, and so he invited the whole street, and that's what they did. They ate food and just kind of exchanged names and stuff, and pretty cool. But on their street, I think like Levi started a private Facebook group for the neighborhood. Like if somebody needs something or your dog is lost or whatever. So I don't know. So that's a great idea, Levi. Not that you are listening, but
nice
you
work,
should.
Dude.
But that's what we're talking about. Like just
fostering
eat food,
opportunity to
build relationships.
Yeah, and then again, it's not you taking on the whole neighborhood. It's the whole neighborhood actually getting connected.
Right. Because those you eat food together, you build relationships, and then like the fourth and fifth ideas to these that we can share for the keys of better neighboring come right after that. So the fourth one would be to meet tangible needs. So I just said that, that's a great. You gather together for a meal, you get to know people, you realize like, oh wow, I didn't know that, my neighbor just finished doing drywall in his house, and he's really good at drywall. We were talking about house projects, and now I'm stumped on how to do drywall in my house. Maybe I could call him up and he could help or whatever. That's just and vice versa. Like maybe you're having a meal and they're talking about what they're doing around their house, and they're like, oh man, yeah, we gotta cut down this tree in the backyard and grind the stump and carry all the stuff out of there. And you're like, I could probably help
with that.
Do you need help? So meet tangible needs, right? I mean, that's very biblical,
right?
To give the biblical idea of that is the acts of mercy, right? Like to be a person who gives mercy. Isn't that the deacon? Isn't that translated?
Oh,
or am I getting my Greek word right?
Well, I think a deacon, if I remember. Well, I mean, they're kind of like a servant.
Yeah, but I think it's
server.
Diakosune. I'll have to look that up. But the Greek word, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, to serve, to offer these helps to one another, right? So.
Okay, so listen to God, identify people of peace, gather for a meal, and then you're going to meet tangible needs. Yeah. It doesn't have to, I suppose, be in this order.
No.
But meet tangible needs, and then finally
talk about your faith.
Yeah.
I did share in there also a couple of statistics from a Barna group research study about kind of the non-Christian American culture, but in there it was kind of interesting. But there was one that I shared that said 62% of your unchurched neighbors would be open to having a faith conversation, but only 34% of them know a Christian that they feel that they could have that conversation with. Well, I guess it was 62% said they would be open to a faith conversation if they were allowed to come to their own conclusions about faith.
Sure.
Okay. So, but only 34% of them know a Christian that would allow them
do that.
To let's just have can we just talk about it?
Yeah.
Like seriously, just have a conversation. Like not
an argument.
Not an argument.
Not something that needs to be won or lost.
Right. Not a debate. Like,
when you think about it, that is kind of how Jesus modeled his own conversations.
Yeah.
In some ways, right? Like the rich young man comes to talk to him, and when Jesus finishes, his talk with him, he just asks him a question.
Yeah.
It's not like he says, and you got to believe this or that way. He just kind of leaves it open-ended.
Yeah.
He leaves opportunity for the guy to respond, and the guy walks away sad. But I mean, Jesus wasn't He didn't really try to force people in any direction. He basically just offered himself.
And that's also why Jesus taught in parables.
Ah, sure.
So Jesus, a lot of times I, as a reader, sometimes I'm like, Jesus, just cut to the point. I mean, that's what his disciples are like oftentimes too. Like, I don't know, Jesus, like, just tell us. Can you just tell what do you mean by that story?
Right.
And sometimes he
That's
offers a glimpse to them. As you're talking about these parables, sometimes he tells them. I mean, especially like the parable of the sower, Jesus does explain.
Right, to his
this.
disciples.
So why does he talk in parables? It's so that people can come to a knowledge of the truth, kind of. What's the word? Intrinsically? Or on their
Yeah.
like just.
Inductively,
like it just happens.
They're drawn into the story. They can connect to the story without having to like fit into some tiny little like very defined box.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the best teachers that I've ever had were the ones that had the capacity to do that for me as a student.
Yeah.
Or the stuff that I recall at the deepest level. It was somehow like trickled in, and all of a sudden it goes, oh, now I get it. I get it. Instead of just, here's information, memorize this information, here's information, memorize this information, do this thing, here's the,
Right.
Like, no. I mean, so the stuff that's deep within us is stuff that we've heard and we've seen, and it's been modeled to us, and we've experienced it, and all those things come into us, and we're like, well, of course, there's no other way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, when you talk about like like the difference between giving information and other ways we can talk about our faith, like as we talk about sharing our faith, we don't have to necessarily do it in the context of, well, let me give you a lesson about who God is and who Jesus is. It could be as simple as just talking about how we have seen God work in our own life.
Yes, exactly.
Over the last week, like, we were praying about my cousin who had some sort of health issue, and he got healed, and or like it worked out well,
right.
And we're just thankful to God that happened. I mean, that's pretty simple, pretty basic,
right.
But it demonstrates your faith.
Right. And that's the goal, is to, we talk about being a witness. What does that mean? I mean, an eyewitness simply just recalls what they saw and experienced.
Right.
So hopefully what you're witnessing with your own eyes is what Jesus is doing in you and what he's doing around you, forgiving you of your sins, giving you life and the sustenance of it, and filling you with hope and peace. And that is what you then share with the world. It's not generally your job to point out and say, this, that's where you messed up. That's what you did wrong.
Right.
God would not be happy with you for that. You should change that. Like, there ends up being a place for that when we're in good relationship with people, and especially if they're Christian people already. But for unchurched people who don't yet know Jesus, our expectation can't be that they're going to be living according to God's ways.
Oh, of course
they
not.
just need to hear. They need to hear about that hope and life that's available in Jesus, and we got to trust that God's going to keep working on them. And then we pray for them more, and then we, have some food with them more, and then we serve some tangible needs together some more, and then maybe faith comes up some more. It's just like,
it's a slow game. It's a long game.
Totally.
But God is in all of this, neighborhood interaction. God is watering and growing and working. I mean, that's how he talks about his kingdom, that it's happening. We don't see it right away. We want immediate results. That's not normally how it works.
Yep.
But God is working in it.
Yeah. Well, and I just briefly mentioned the parable of the sower, but that's where in the Bible Jesus talks about it. The sower throws out the seed, and some falls on rocky soil, and it's really not going to grow all that well. Some falls, and it gets choked out. Some falls, and the birds eat it. Some falls on good soil. But what's the point there? It's not just to look for the good soil and be like, I'm going to plant the seed here.
Right.
It's just to keep scattering. Just keep scattering the seed. That's it. And we trust that God is at work in that.
Yeah, totally. All right. So
Yeah.
Little recap, what? So listen to God.
Yep. Identify people of peace.
Identify people of peace. Gather for meals. Meet tangible needs. Share your faith.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm sitting here as somebody who is trying to put these things into practice in my own life too. I would not say I am an expert neighbor. This is something that God has slowly convicting me of and changing my heart for, but I certainly see the reason for it. And when we're listening to God and we see repetitively throughout the scriptures, like the law is fulfilled when you love your neighbor as yourself, that's like, yeah, I should do that, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, so let's go and do it, right?
Say, yeah, join us.
For the sake of the kingdom
right.
Of God here on earth. Like this is how he's doing it. So, yeah, hopefully that's helpful. We'd love to hear from you, if you've got questions or comments
or tips for us, like how you're finding good ways to love your neighbors or your neighborhood. Let us know. I think that's another thing we can do is to share best practices as well.
Absolutely.
As we all try to do this together.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, as always, it was good to sit and conversate with you, buddy.
Likewise, Aaron. Great to be with you.
Until next time.